Hi everyone, I'm Andrea Trank. I am a certified integrative medicine health coach and a yoga teacher, registered with the Yoga Alliance. I've taught over 5,000 hours of yoga to hundreds and hundreds of students. So now that we're all moving our practices online, I'd like to do a public service announcement to help all of you who are taking yoga now from home be safer in your practice. Whether you practice with me or someone else, these are all some safety considerations to take into account. So when people sign up to practice with me, either in person in the past or online, I do make them sign a medical release form, and most of us yoga teachers do. So I'm going to read you that out loud because probably a lot of you sign it without even reading it. It says, I acknowledge that any program of fitness or exercise involves a risk of injury, and I agree to accept full responsibility for any injuries sustained during these yoga sessions. I am medically able to participate in the program of exercise, and then there would be a release. I release and discharge, let's say me, from any claims or causes of actions whatsoever arising out of or connected with the yoga services provided. So some people think that's enough, and I don't, which is why I stress safety so much with my students. Because here is the thing. I came from a science teaching background, and they drummed into us the importance of keeping our students safe. So I'm offering this as what I would call a public service announcement. Do any of you remember the public service announcements in the past? I remember them as a child. They're helpful pieces of information, and I think all of us could benefit from this piece of information regardless of who you're practicing with. So let's get through this. There's all sorts of great information for you. I will demonstrate some things, but I'll also talk you through some things. The first thing to start off with understanding is the precepts of yoga. Yoga's not like any other exercise practice because it involves mind, body, and breath all unified. Yoga means unified together. And so, in other words, you wouldn't be doing yoga with earphones on, listening to something, or watching TV. When you're here on the mat, you're here on the mat. Every part of you, your brain, your body, your breath, your emotions are all here on the mat. And that's what makes yoga so special. It also allows you to really observe everything that's going on with you. And that's where the beauty of yoga comes in. It's in the observation of what is happening as we breathe and move our bodies in specific ways. So, 2, as you are practicing, if your breath becomes ragged, if something feels terribly uncomfortable, if you get lightheaded, if you feel unwell or nauseous all of a sudden, the advice is to stop. Now, maybe you would stop and get into a child's pose, unless it's the child's pose that is causing the discomfort. So the typical child's pose, and I'll probably have to push myself back so you can see this. You might be able to see from the side. Let's see. I'm still working out the proportions of everything so that I can demonstrate and have you be able to see. So I'm going to move further back. And a child's pose, I always take a blanket under my knees for a child's pose. I widen my knees because it's more comfortable for me. And then if you'll notice my feet, I tuck my toes under. You don't have to do that, but I do that because I get cramps in my feet. So oftentimes I will take a bolster or a rolled blanket and put it under my toes. Then I shift my hips back, and then I come forward and lay my head down. Now the other issue for people when they lay their head down is they might not be able to reach the floor. And in that case, you would take a block or a book or a rolled up towel or whatever you have. So you could rest like this. You could rest with your arms back by your side. You could even make fists and then gently lay your head on the fist. Now the other issue that happens to people when they're in child's pose is sometimes their butt doesn't come all the way down. So in that case, you might actually want to take the bolster and place the bolster between your thighs and your lower legs, and then rest in child's pose. So child's pose is supposed to be a restful pose. If it's not restful for you, you might just want to sit up and take a break. But here's the thing. Our minds are really interesting. They tend to like to trick our bodies into anticipating pain or thinking something is painful when it's just a sensation. So I don't even use the word pain. What I use is the word sensation. And then I ask my students, as if you were in a doctor's office, on a sensation scale from 0 to 10, how much sensation are you getting in this pose? You don't want to be, in general, above an 8. That's when sensation crosses into pain. And yet, on the other hand, many of us under a 4 are not feeling anything. In that case, you might incrementally try to go deeper into a pose or push yourself a little bit more just to get some benefit out of the pose. Now I'm going to take a sip of tea. We are supposed to drink a lot of hot liquids to keep ourselves safe during this time. So I have my lemongrass ginger tea. Okay. So back to the particular sensation scale. You want your sensation to be somewhere between a 4 and an 8, depending on your general state of health, what you're feeling like today. The most important part of yoga is the fact that it is an inquiry. Yoga is an inquiry into what's going on inside your body, what's going on with your emotions, what's going on with your breath, and what's going on in your spirit. And so if you spend the time to observe as if you are standing outside of yourself, watching yourself, or watching clouds as they go by, you'll get so much more out of your yoga practice than just an exercise or stretching program. I'm going to go into now some specific poses that tend to be troublesome for my students as I teach them, and give you what I consider the best practices based on a lot of research I've done and a lot of trainings I've done. Again, the most important thing you can do is pay attention to what's going on in your body, your breath, and your mind as you're doing the pose. But these are just a few little tips and hints. So I am going to stand up for these, and I do have my notes because I'm a teacher, and a teacher always writes down notes. So we're going to start off with the forward fold. The forward fold can be very troublesome for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons, mostly because of a weak core, weak quads, too tight hamstrings, and tightness in the back. So the way I make a forward fold a little more accessible is I do use props like blocks. If you don't have blocks at home, good sturdy books work. And I have people start standing, and I'm going to turn sideways so you can see this. And instead of doing this, I have them bend their knees a lot, draw their belly in, hinge at the hips, at first even laying the belly on the thighs, placing your hands on whatever prop you have or the floor, and tucking your chin in a little bit. Now from here you should feel a nice stretch in your low back. If you want to go further and your hamstrings are not constricting you, you could start to straighten your knees. Now as you can see with me, I've got very tight hamstrings. And so this is about it for me with a forward fold. And then I just relax and release. Coming out of a forward fold is just as important. I see a lot of people doing this in a way that's not the safest. So the first thing I ask my students to do is draw their shoulders back. And a great way to draw the shoulders back is place your hands on your thigh. Keep that belly engaged and lead with the back between your shoulders. Lead that way, and come up to standing. So that is a safe way to do a forward fold. Obviously, if you're an advanced practitioner and you don't have back issues, you can do the traditional forward fold. But that hasn't worked for me or a lot of my students, and so I like to teach the safe way. You can always go further than what I'm teaching you, but since I won't be there next to you or your teacher won't be there next to you, it's always good to know the safest way to do something. All right, moving on. Let's move on to downward facing dog. Now, downward dog has some of the same issues in it. I see a lot of people having very straight legs in downward dog. If you can do it, that's great. Most of us have incredibly tight hamstrings, and tight hamstrings will mean the downward dog becomes more of a hamstring stretch than it does a back stretch. And downward dog is designed to stretch your spine. Yoga really starts with the spine. And so sometimes I might even use blocks for my dog too, but I'll place them aside for now. But it's basically the same idea. I draw my belly in, I bend my knees a lot, but this time I'm drawing my hands further away from me, maybe even walking them away, and lengthening my spine, pulling my shoulders down, pulling my belly in, and breathing here. So you should be feeling this as an incredibly long spine. Now, once again, if you're able to straighten your legs or put your heels on the ground, more power to you. I'm not. So if you tend to get dizzy after doing a dog and you're at home, I wouldn't come right up to standing. I might come down first and just see how I'm feeling. When your head is upside down and then you immediately come up to standing, that can cause a vasovagal response, or if you have blood pressure issues, and I was going to get into that later, but I might as well mention it since I'm showing you the dog right now. All right, moving on, the warriors. Something you're going to do probably in most of your yoga classes. So I see people doing some very interesting things with warriors. And when I talk about the warriors, I love to talk about the fact that yoga was originally designed for young men. These were training monks. And this was a training that I received when I took Leslie Kaminoff's class. I took a 72-hour advanced training with him on principles of yoga anatomy. And he said, most of you are not built like a 14-year-old boy, right? So if you're not built like a 14-year-old boy, and particularly for women, our hips go out like this, we're not going to be able to stand the same way as a 14-year-old boy. So, and again, I'm not doing a flow or anything, I'm just showing you specific poses for safety issues. In general, you want to be able to have your hips facing forward when you're doing a warrior one. Now, for some people, this may not feel comfortable. You do have to adjust your foot for the level that feels comfortable. But when I see people doing it like this, which was a traditional way of doing it, it really tugs on my low back, and it might be tugging on yours. So in order to keep your low back safe, the way I was trained is you imagine that your feet are on railroad, the sides of the railroad tracks, you know, that go that way, and you widen your stance a little bit. And if you want to lengthen your stance, you could draw your back foot further back, allowing you to bend a little further in the front. Now think about this. This is a warrior pose. Do you feel stable and strong in a pose like this? If you're super wobbly, then you've got to find a warrior pose where you feel stable and strong. So this is a warrior one, which is considered a closed hip pose. On the other hand, a warrior two is an open hip pose, and it's not both hips opening the same amount. So I'm going to come back to standing, and I'm going to set up for you for warrior two. So in warrior two, the way I was trained from I took an advanced course from a chiropractor, and it was called the Stress-Free Yoga Practice. And he said a great way to set up for a warrior two, and I'm going to show you both from the side and from the front, is to start with your legs wide, and the width of your legs would depend on the length of your arms. So I have very long arms, so my legs are wider than you might have it. From there, I would take, let's say, my left foot, turn it towards you, and my right toes would slightly turn in. But I'm still keeping my hips open. Then I would start to bend my front knee. Now, something I see a lot of my yoga students doing is their knee dragging into the middle, or their knee, or like this, which is very uncomfortable. So you really want to see if your knee is pointing straight ahead over the second toe. Again, if you need to go deeper into this pose, go deeper from the back. Good. And here we are. Now we're in a warrior two pose. Breathing. I sometimes place my hands toward the sky. It's a little easier on my shoulders. Sometimes I place my hands like that. I am going to show you from the front view too, because I see something else a lot of my students doing. And again, do you feel stable in this pose? Okay, I'm going to show you the other way. So, sometimes when we teachers are demonstrating, we only do one side, and then we wonder why we're not feeling well. So if I was doing it the other way, I'm going to go wide facing you. Check out my length of my stance. This time I'm turning my right toes forward. My left toes are turning in. I am bending my knee, but in this case, I might need to slide my foot back if I want to go deeper into the pose. I'm checking out my knee to make sure it's pointing the right direction. Going into a warrior two. Now the thing I see some people doing is that. And what I'd like for you to think of is you have a plumb line down the middle of your body. And this plumb line is mountain pose. And we should have a mountain pose literally in every pose we're doing, standing. That's where we get our spinal strength and stability. Good, warrior two. All right, I just want to show you a couple of other poses, and I see some interesting things going on. One of them is triangle. Now, in general, triangle starts maybe in a warrior two, but I tend to narrow my triangle, not make it quite as extended out. And instead of sticking that hip way out, I would like for you to reach forward as if you're doing a cartwheel, and then cartwheeling up and down. Now, some of my students, when I first met them, tried to do that. Now, this doesn't work for me as triangle. It hurts, for one thing. My body is too contorted, and it's not an up and down pose. Triangle is an up and down pose. So your spine is twisting up, and you get the side stretch. So I'd rather see people do more of an up pose so that they really have that feeling of twist and openness in a triangle. Now the other crazy thing I see students do all the time is weird things with their hands. And you might not be able to see my hand. I'm going to go even further back so you can see. So like they do this kind of crazy thing with their hand, turning their hand backward. That hurts. Your hand should be facing forward. Palm, I mean. And I try to explain this to my students a lot. Breathe. Come on up. I'm going to do a triangle to the other side just to make sure I stay balanced. One other thing is neck issues. Don't look up if your neck hurts. You can keep your head neutral. You can look down. So once again, these are safety issues that I would love for you to use in whatever practice you're doing, whether you're practicing with me or not. I'll be offering these tips as I work with my students. However, you might be choosing to do your home practice with all the millions of other yoga teachers who are now turning their practices online. All right, twists. Twists have some issues in them. And I remember when Leslie Kaminoff taught this about twists. In order to do a twist safely, you either have to immobilize your lower body or your upper body. So, like for instance, if this is, staying straight, I turn from my waist and I twist from my waist to my shoulders, right? The reason he says that is because this part of your spine, the lumbar part of your spine, is not meant to twist. This part of your spine, the middle part of your spine, is meant to twist, right? This is supposed to twist, not this part. So in any twist you do, be aware either you're moving your shoulders as a unit, or let's keep my shoulders still, I'm moving my hips as a unit. These are both ways to get into twists, and there's lots of twists to do, and I will be going through many, many twists with my students, except the pregnant ones. You are not to do twists, especially when you get into your third trimester, unless I'll show you one safe way. Okay, so now I want to talk about special populations just for a minute, and I started talking about pregnancy. So there's a few things you need to be aware of during pregnancy. Number one is, have you gotten clearance to be able to exercise? Because exercise is great when you're pregnant as long as you have been exercising. It's not something that you just want to start all of a sudden. And if you've had high-risk pregnancies in the past, I had 2 miscarriages between my two of my children. And during those first 12 weeks of the pregnancy that actually lasted, I was a little nervous about trying a lot of new things because I really wanted to be safe. But if you have a normal pregnancy and everything is going along great, then yoga can be incredibly beneficial for you. And so first trimester in general, as long as it's not high risk and you've gotten medical permission, you just do the yoga practice that you've normally done, and you just do it carefully and be aware. You don't wear yourself out. You make sure you have a lot of fluid in you and that you're not feeling lightheaded or getting any spotting. Second trimester, things get a little different. It's actually a great time to be doing yoga because you are starting to feel a lot sorer. You are going to need the support, particularly for your lower back, and you're going to start feeling aches and pains in your hips. Your body is getting a lot more flexible because of all the extra elastin in your body. And so besides not being on your belly, you should not be on your belly starting second trimester, most of the moves are pretty safe. Again, you need to moderate your level of activity and be aware of how it feels. So in your third trimester, you are not to be on your belly, obviously. You are not to be on your back. If you want to do anything in a prone position, you would want something large like this, a bolster, and then I would take my bolster, and I actually did this with a woman who was pregnant with twins, and I would take 2 blocks under the bolster, making a ledge like this. So we now, and I have to pull it further back so you can see my ledge. Can you see it now? It looks like a ledge. So you're kind of tilted up. And then she was doing her positions like this. So she wasn't, and sometimes we even took another blanket and put it under her head like that, so that she would be doing the position. So for instance, if we were doing a hamstring stretch, she would do her hamstring stretch, and we'd probably use a strap like this. So she might even, pull her knees up and do things like that. But this is as flat as she got on the ground in the third trimester. Let's see. Oh, the things you want to do a lot of during the third trimester are squats. I wish I had done a lot of squats. These are excellent for a pregnant woman in her 3rd trimester. Even doing things like lifting one leg up in a squat. You know, you want to be strong down here. So these kind of poses are great. Here's something about twists with 3rd trimester of pregnancy. Now, normally in a twist, right, we might do something like that. You would not want to do that in your 3rd trimester of pregnancy. You don't want to twist toward the bent knee. What you might want to do is open up a little bit this way, opening up away from the bent knee, because your belly needs to have room. You don't want to squish the babies or feel uncomfortable, compress anything. And then something like this. All of the wide-legged poses, your knees apart, even things like this are really good. You could do poses like this. So if you're taking my classes and you're pregnant, I'm going to make sure that you do these poses safely. I will do reminders. Other special populations would be the elderly or people with balance issues. If you have balance issues, I would recommend either standing next to something. Now I have something here, but this is what I often see my yoga students do. They stand far away, and then if they need help in their balance, they're doing that. That's not the way I'd like for you to use a wall or a ledge. What I prefer you would do is you'd stand very close to the area. And that way you could lift your hand up. So let's say I'm setting up for my tree pose. My hand is here, my hand is off. My hand is here, my hand is off. Maybe I do that, or maybe I keep one hand the whole time on there. This way you're not leaning toward one side or the other to keep your balance. If you are going to use a chair, it has to be a sturdy, steady chair, and I prefer my students keep their chairs at least 2 feet on the mat so it doesn't slip. So once again, standing close to the chair, using that. Now you even saw I leaned over a little bit, and getting my balance, putting my hand on the chair whenever I need it. That would be the way to use a chair safely for balances. Couple more things. I know I'm throwing a lot at you because I really want to get this out there and people might find this really beneficial. Shoulder issues. Rather than do arms completely up, which can pinch your shoulders and create more problems, you could adapt your poses to have cactus arms and you're still getting the benefit. That's a great thing to do with shoulder issues. I did mention already with neck issues, I'm going to go in a down position. So with a neck issue, if I were to do a windmill kind of pose, I would say don't look up at all. So you would just twist your body, keeping your eyes down the whole time. This is also good for people who tend to get dizzy, because the issue is when you are head down looking up, that can create some dizziness. Now, I do want to one more thing I want to say. In terms of coming safely up from a downward pose up to standing, if you have blood pressure issues or get dizzy, you stop here for a moment, get your head above the heart, take a few breaths here, and then stand up. So I hope this tape has been helpful. This is my public service announcement. This is what I can offer the world besides, teaching my students itself, is my intense understanding of safety in yoga. So I want you to please consider practicing still at home, but do it in the safest way possible. And if you want to practice with me, there are many ways you can. Just reach out to me, and I look forward to seeing you all again as we all navigate the waters of COVID-19.